Hey everybody, it's been a long time, so let's go ahead and get started with Lesson 3, Fry, Modal, Falsetto. Going to talk about the levels, the mix, and the master. Now, as with anything, we're probably not going to see eye to eye on this, but I'd like for you to see my reasoning behind why I categorize it this way and why I'm looking at it this way, and also how I'm approaching this part of the voice. So I like to see it as vocal development outcome, meaning that there are different levels of which we are at in the stage of our vocal development. For example, when we first started singing, whether when we were younger or when our voice changed, we focused on breathing. And there are also a couple of things that our voice exuded. For example, if we sang too low, our voice went into what we would call a vocal fry. And when we sang too high, it would break into a falsetto. There is some connection in the voice, right? There's a little bit of stability, but the range was typically limited. I remember when my voice first changed, I was only able to sing one or two notes, and then there was like a huge falsetto that was there, and nothing in between. And when I got too low, my voice just cut off. And then after a couple more days or weeks or so passed by, I was able to sing very low, and I wasn't able to sing any other notes in between my lowest notes and my falsetto. And this is very typical of changing voices, specifically the changing into bass or baritone voices, and that they lose that middle part. And it's not because they've lost the notes; it's just they've lost the sensation of where those notes are. And usually what we would do is we would use falsetto, vocal fry to help them reestablish that part. And that's going to be very important, especially when I present to you later on what the graph that will show you kind of like where the ranges are. Now, as we develop ourselves, right, our breathing is still a part of this process. We start to develop a mix between, the stretching of our folds versus I don't want to say compression, but really the thickness of our folds. Our voice becomes more connected, there is some stability, and our range starts to increase. And this is important because some people have higher speaking voices and lower speaking voices, and they assume that that is their true range, when really they haven't truly established efficiency with their voice. So their range will slowly increase, not because their voice range is increasing, but because they're finding more efficiency with their own voice. It's kind of like, think of a tuba or a trumpet. You can move like this the slides out slightly, but then it's pretty set, right? Unless you add on to the instrument, you can't really increase the range that much. But what you can do is increase the efficiency of the air and the embouchure to increase your range. Now, the advancing part, and this is typically where a lot of singers, when they've been singing for a couple of years or many years, they develop, obviously, good breathing habits, a better mix. They sound connected. There is some increased stability and flexibility in addition to expression and range. Now, the range is not as important as the others, right? Being connected, having a good mix, and the stability, flexibility, and expression are all these musical things that we want as a singer. And finally, the mastery stage, right? The breathing is still a part of it. A mastered mix, almost as if they are connected from the top to the bottom with no physical differences. Like the color is exactly the same from the top all the way to the bottom. Is just an increase of flexibility, expression, and most importantly, stamina, range, and musicality. Now, if we were to use my voice as an example, I would say I would be in the advancing stage, where I have a little bit of these things in control, maybe some things that I need to develop. Mastery, it depends on the genre. Now, if I were to sing opera, I would say I would be in the advancing stage because I don't quite have the stamina, or I haven't tested my stamina in a long time. when it comes to like a full opera of some sort. So I would be in the advancing stage of that area in my voice. And so this is not set in stone. These stages are always a cycle, right? If you're learning something, you're developing, you're advancing, and mastery. And it's not all of these in one bag every single time. It could be a mix of these things. It could be just one or two things that you're working on. But I like to see it as vocal development outcome as opposed to saying, okay, I am this, and this is what I'm good at right now at this moment. And you can't really take a snapshot of these things, especially when you are developing your voice. So I have this thing, let me turn off my video really quick. I have this thing called the bell curve theory for vocal fold state. This is just something that I thought up of. It may be relatable to you in some way, shape, or form, or other studies. If you can show me those, that'd be great. I would love that. But this is just what I've come up with in my own. I'm turning off the video so you can see what I'm looking at here. Vocal fry, modal, and falsetto. And as I look through these things, I am seeing that there is a mix in these areas, and then there is the modal part of my voice. So if I think of full 100% vocal fold closure, meaning that my voice is completely, my vocal folds are completely adducted together, there is no air escaping, right? Nothing is escaping. Whereas falsetto is open and there is air escaping. There's no sound yet, right? So there's no sound. If it's all the way 100% open, there's no sound, right? Except for the letter H. Now, if I slowly bring those together, let's say these numbers don't really mean anything. Just think of them as kind of like a range of where it's at. So let's see if we brought that in a little bit. We start to get a breathy sound, right? And it's almost as if like the voice is trying to come together and they're loose. They are just barely touching in this sense. And as I go through, I start to enter this idea of modal. You call it chest, whatever it is. The vocal folds are coming together and they're becoming more efficient in this sense. I'm using the amount of energy and air that I'm using is now relative to relatable to the sound that I'm putting out. Oh, and as I increase that tension, I start to get a mix of what we would say, not officially, but the vocal fry mix or a chest fry mix or a fry mix, however way you want to say it. Oh, and pretty soon I lose all the air, right? So what I'm saying is, if I think of it as this part right here is just full vocal fold closure, this here is starting to open up and stretch a little bit more. This point right here would be most efficient, and here it becomes a little more detached to where all the way to the point to where there's just air flowing through. It starts to make a little bit more sense, at least in my mind, when I see this or when I hear my own voice. So as we move through to the next slide, right, you'll notice here, this is a little bit of something that I've also seen, right, using as opposed to using the terms fry, modal, etc. One would use M0, M1, M2, and M3. And in the description, I'll give you that part of it as well. And it's the same idea. Is your voice completely in a state of full closure and slack in thickness and not a lot of length, which would be M0? Is it in a state of a mix, which is where you're slowly opening up to stretch the folds for efficiency? Are you stretching too much and just allowing your voice to be lighter and not touching completely, but still making sound? And then are you just letting the sound escape or breathing with like a certain vowel of some sort? And obviously, if you go too far, you get nothing. And same here, if you go too far, you get nothing. But I like to think of the voice as always being in the mix, you can say, if it is producing some sort of pitch or there is some sort of control. And then there is a sense of mastery here, where now if you listen to just listen to any great opera singer, they are typically always in alignment, and there is a little bit of leeway, not going to completely to falsetto, but always leaning to a little bit lighter in the mechanism, to a little bit heavier in the mechanism, and then also the most efficient with their mechanism. And that's the reason why I like to think of it this way, is not, I'm no longer worried about my vocal fold state. I'm just worried about the color, the mix, and if I'm connected or disconnected in this sense. So let's take a look at these things right here. So let me move my video out of the way. Actually, I'll just go ahead and leave it there. So this area right here, I've shown you this before. This is typically what vocal fry looks like. And you'll notice how the instability or the inconsistency of the pitch, right? They're working, right? The voice is touching. See how it doesn't quite touch there, but it touches here, and then it doesn't quite touch here, and then it touches here again. So the periodic movement of the folds and them reaching each other at certain points, it's very unstable, almost to the point to where there's the pitch is like kind of like all over the place. So if I were to show you vocal fry, it would just be and see how there's some pitch and then no pitch, some pitch, and then there's a lot of that bubbly sound, that vocal fry sound. And that's part of the reason why we call it creaky voice. And there's not really a vowel present, and even though there's space available, that space is being compromised. Whereas chest and modal, see how every wave is realized, right? It's on, off, and that period of on and off creates the pitch, and the further or the longer it is, the lower the pitch. So if I were to give you C, so that'll be C right there. And if I sing it falsetto, right, where I'm just barely touching, right, rather than thinking of it as falsetto high, you can imitate that idea of falsetto very low, where it's like this. Right? And if your voice is very breathy down there, what you don't want to do is you don't want to add any more pressure to it. But for the most part, it's not going to hurt your voice, because your mechanism is very light. You're not forcing anything that's happening. You're not bringing your folds, forcibly pushing the folds together. And so if it does sound like that, it's okay. And you just got to develop that connection, right? Yeah. Do. Dum. Right? Just whatever it takes. Use consonants, use brighter vowels to really get there, and just allow the space to take care of what it needs to do. Now, if you are running into connection issues, you can start with a vocal fry. And what that does is it brings it to complete closure, and you just slowly open. What you don't want to do is you don't want to try to amplify this sense of tension. And that's where the issue is with vocal fry, is that we try to amplify the tension as opposed to using the tension to regulate the typical chest or modal voice that we would have, to regulate that sense of thickness, as well as bringing the folds together. That's the important part of vocal fry, and that's typically what a lot of people miss. So when you do fry, see how I'm starting to find that low C? Yeah. And as I move down, it's kind of hard to hear, what pitch I'm on because these headphones are just, yeah. Anyways, as you move down, right, that vocal fry, use it to just establish pitch and connection. Don't try to use that as a form of musical communication, because it's not going to be. You may establish pitch and some stability, but it's not going to be the same, right? Oh, right. Even low C is can be difficult if you're not careful in that area when you get down there. So moving on to the next slide, here is just a couple of things, right? This is from Freddie Mercury's analysis of sub-harmonics, etc. Right? Notice how there is an offset that's happening here, and look at what's happening for every normal vibration. There are three additional vibrations that occur, or three periodic meetings between the ventricular, which is the false folds, and the true folds. That's kind of where the false folds meet with the true folds to create the pitch. And subharmonic, from what I have gathered, would probably look a little bit more like this, where it's asymmetric, right? You have a little bit of that vocal fry concept, and then the full modal concept. And that's, see how it's, even though it's trying to line up, it's slightly off set. So the period, as opposed to just being here, 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 to the listener, it feels like it's this entire wave as one. So this ratio here, it almost feels as if it's one full wave, because it's meeting at different points as opposed to meeting at the same points, right? So instead of going one here, one here, one here, one here, to the listener, it sounds like it's a longer wave. And that's part of that, you can say, acoustic energy that we feel, right, when we sing subharmonic or sing in subharmonics. Right, and all these concepts are just, they are, no voice is more special than another. It's just we found ways to get to where we need to be. And so unless your anatomy is completely different from someone else's, and what I mean by completely different, I mean like very different, all these things are accessible for us. All these things are within the range of what we can do. And depending on what we want to do, right, depending on what we look at and what we want to do with our voice, it's all up to the singer. You've probably heard very low basses say, you know, I don't sing in fry, you know, I don't vocal fry, or I don't do any fry. And what they're really saying is their voice refuses to go into a state of tension or too much tension, right? They don't enjoy that sound, and to get it to that point, it doesn't feel like singing anymore. They have the possibility of doing it. It's just not a part of their singing voice. And so when they sing, they typically stay in this area right here. Is there a mix? I'll leave it up to you to judge. But for the most part, they're looking for that full connection, that energy, that connection down to the lowest of voice. Right? So if I'm going, right, that's C2 for me always feels in this energy, right? It may not in your own voice, but for within the confines of my own voice, it feels like it's right here. Now, when I sing it too breathy, it feels like it's over here. Right, there's not enough connection. It's going into a mix, and it's almost toward that side of falsetto, or that M2 or M3 state. And if I go too far the other way, right, it becomes vocal fry. There can be some breath escaping, but it's very bubbly. It's not stable, but it does help me find that connection. So use these as tools as opposed to a reflection of the actual voice. So what I mean is, don't worry about what state you are in. Just be aware of it and the benefits as well as the drawbacks, right? You don't want to sing falsetto so loud that you start jamming up your voice. You don't want to sing modal so loud that you start belting beyond the limits of your vocal folds. And you don't want to be in a vocal fry or a mix for so long and so loud that you introduce now tension throughout your entire voice. So these are just a couple of concepts for this lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Send me an email, or I think comments, I respond the quickest to that. And I'd like to thank you for your time. If you like these, I'll be more than happy to bring you lesson 4, which is already in the works. Otherwise, just do what you got to do, right? Enjoy your day, and we'll see you next time.